حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على
إن الحمد لله نحمده تعالى ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله تعالى من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا وقائدنا ونبينا وعظيمنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Indeed, all praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Him we seek refuge. Through Him we seek gratitude, and only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do we turn in sincere repentance, asking for forgiveness. He whomever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides to the straight path, no one is capable of misguiding. And he whomever chooses to lead themselves astray, no one is capable of correcting their path and bringing them back to guidance except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah alone. And I bear witness and testify that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam was His servant and faithful messenger who conveyed the message in its entirety, without subtraction, without addition, without manipulation, until the end of time. My dear brothers and sisters, and youngsters in the audience, inshallah today, I want to talk about an extraordinary concept in our deen that is not an option. It is actually an obligation. And it's the obligation of ihsan, of excellence in everything we do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands, it's not an option, it's an order, commands justice, excellence in our affairs, and maintaining our ties of kinship, meaning staying close to your family and relatives, especially the ones you have disagreements with, especially the ones you don't get along with, especially the ones you have business disputes with. It's an order from Allah to maintain our ties of kinship. But today I want to talk about that middle command of the command of ihsan. What exactly is ihsan? Because somewhere else in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no soul, no single person will ever be given a burden that is more than they can handle. You shall receive that which you earn, and you shall be accountable for that which you conducted. So how do we connect these two concepts? The concept of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never put you in a position to test you with something, to challenge you with something that He does not already know you have everything it takes to rise to that challenge and to meet that test with patience and with perseverance. And being tested is a guarantee, another guarantee from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ. And we shall test you. It is going to happen. Every person will experience this. بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ. You will be tested with something of fear and hunger. And Allah continues, وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. And loss, reduction in your wealth, your health, yourselves, and your blessings, your provisions. وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. And give glad tidings to those who are patient. الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Who are those people who are patient? The ones whom whenever they are afflicted with a test, any one of these tests, a loss of wealth, a loss of status, a loss of health, a loss of family, a loss of property, they turn to Allah subhanahu and they say, indeed we are from Allah and to Allah we shall return. Which is such an extraordinary thing to say. Because anytime you face a difficulty, you have to center that difficulty in the absolute certainty and ultimate truth that Allah is in control. Everything can seem in disarray. Things can seem like they are collapsing around you. Questions may be available for which there are no clear answers. But the only thing that is absolutely certain is that we came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah is eternal, unchanging. And to Him we shall return. And so what is Allah going to ask us about? Is He going to ask us about the specific results? Or is He going to ask us about the intentions and the efforts? A lot of us, my dear brothers and sisters, have fallen into the trap of assuming that results are in our control. So you have a family member, and that family member, you try to encourage them to come with you to the masjid. You try to encourage them to give up a bad habit, smoking, or any other type of addiction. You try to encourage them to be a better father, or a better son, or a better daughter, or a better wife. You try to encourage them to connect with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you try so many things. You try incentives. You give them gifts. You try maybe sometimes the tough love approach. You're a little bit harsh, but you come at it from a place of love. And you keep trying and trying and you still don't see the results. And you start to give up. But the results are not in your hands or my hands. And if anyone can guarantee the results, it would have been the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعُ نَفْسَكَ عَلَى آثَارِهِمْ إِن لَمْ يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ أَسَفًا. O Muhammad, it's as if you are going to kill yourself with grief. You're so overwhelmed with grief that you might actually perish because they will not accept this message. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphatically says, repeatedly in the Quran, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. You do not possess the power, the authority, or the ability to inspire someone to believe or to have guidance from Allah. Indeed, only Allah has the ability to guide whomever He pleases. So it's important, my dear brothers and sisters, that we don't confuse excellence, which is doing absolutely the best we can in any given situation, with results. Because you could try to do your absolute best, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows when you're doing your best. But that doesn't mean every time when you do your best, you're going to get the reward. There are some people who work extremely hard. Single mothers in Africa who walk 7 kilometers a day just to find clean water, for which they can then prepare food for their children. If you were to put one of these devices on her wrist to measure how many steps and how many calories and how much effort, she arguably works harder than the vast majority of people sitting in an air-conditioned, comfortable office. Does that mean she has the results to show for it necessarily? If you're measuring it according to wealth or status or prestige or degrees on the wall? Maybe not. But is she excelling every single day in the tasks that are in front of her, based on the capacity Allah gave her, based on the opportunities Allah gave her? The answer may very well be yes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala divides His rizq however He pleases. Some people have gifts and other people don't have those gifts. But in the end of the day, everybody's going to show up on the Day of Judgment as a single individual. And Allah is going to say to you, this is what I gave you. What have you done with what I gave you? If I gave you a lot, I expect that you excelled and exerted yourself a lot and used these gifts to the best of your ability. And if I gave you little, I expect that you exerted yourself to the best of your ability with whatever I gave you. There was an experiment that took place in a high school in Chicago almost 2 decades ago. Now, for the youngsters in the room, you can probably appreciate this. Once you get to high school, there are different tests that you do in your gym class, phys ed class, to measure your fitness. One of those is running a kilometer. So the whole class comes out, you run a kilometer, and you're timed for how long it takes you to run the kilometer. Some students can finish the kilometer in a few minutes. Some, it takes them maybe 10 minutes. And the way it used to work in this high school is if you finished the kilometer in less than, let's say, 5 minutes, you got an A grade. If you took between 5 and 6 minutes, it's a B. If you took 6 to 8 minutes, it's a C. And if you took more than 8 minutes, it was a not passing grade, a failure grade. But here's the problem. There are some children who are gifted, who without even trying can complete a kilometer in 3.5 minutes without even breaking a sweat, without panting and breathing hard, because Allah gave them extraordinary lung VO2 capacity and incredible circulation and great ratios of slow and fast twitch muscles in their legs. Without trying, they can do a kilometer in less than 5 minutes. And then there are some other kids who struggle and they push so hard and it still takes them 9 minutes. So a brilliant teacher who partnered with a cardiologist had a better idea. Instead of measuring them based on time, let's measure them based on heart rate. So they put a heart monitor on every single one of the children and let them run a kilometer. Now, a simple rule of thumb is your maximum heart rate is 220 minus your age. So for example, if you're 17 years old, your maximum heart rate is about 203 beats per minute. So what they were doing is they let these kids go and run a kilometer and they measured their heart rate. If the kid's heart rate was very high, close to where the maximum is, that's a very good indication that this child is trying really hard. And they're pushing themselves very hard because their heart is doing a tremendous amount of work. And if their heart rate was low, then it means they're not actually trying all that hard. And subhanAllah, the results were breathtaking. It turns out that the child who had the highest heart rate, her heart was beating at 201 beats per minute on average. She was essentially in the 99th percentile of her maximum heart cardiovascular exertion. It took her 12 minutes to finish the kilometer. And a kid who finished the kilometer in 2 minutes and 47 seconds, his heart was beating at 130, 135 beats per minute. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to Allah belongs the highest example. Allah measures our efforts and our intentions. This is why on the Day of Judgment, the instrument that Allah has selected to evaluate how we performed, in addition to His infinite mercy, is al-mizan, a scale. And the difference between a scale and a register is that a register quantifies things by the number of things, but a scale measures things by their weight. And this is why there are people who will show up on the Day of Judgment with unbelievable amounts of good deeds, but who may ultimately end up in the hellfire, wal-'iyadhu billah. And it's because their intention was to brag or deceive or seek glory from others. And there are people who may come with what seems to be a tremendous track record of poor behavior and sin. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with His mercy may reward them because they had extraordinary intentions in some actions that they had. What this means is every single one of us is liable to exert ourselves to the limit of our potential, to push ourselves as hard as we can. What gifts did Allah give you? Use those gifts as far as you can. And have honor in what you do. If the gift Allah gave you and the opportunity Allah gave you is to work a minimum wage job, do that minimum wage job with ihsan. Don't sit there and think, oh, I used to be, back home in my country, I was so successful, I had servants and I had secretaries, and here I am now in Canada serving coffee to people at Tim Hortons. If Allah gave you this as your opportunity, exert this opportunity with ihsan. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what you don't know. And He shall open doors for you. And He shall bless you immensely. And you may never know. Maybe if you got in this country what you thought you deserved, you would actually have veered away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rizq is as much a blessing as it is a test from Allah. And there are some people who can pass the test of having wealth, and some people who could be absolutely corrupted and destroyed with wealth. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Fighting has been prescribed upon you even though it is disliked for you. And beware that you may dislike something and Allah knows this thing is good for you, and you may wish for something even though that thing may actually be harmful for you. Our responsibility, my dear brothers and sisters, is to excel in everything we do. And that means we have to be honest about what our limitations are, but it also means we shouldn't deceive ourselves We know what we can do. And if you know you can do more, you have a responsibility to do more, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows this capacity of yours, because He gave it to you. He gave it to me. He gave it to every one of us. And it's our responsibility to exercise this capacity to the extent that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given it to us. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ثم أما بعد. تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about ihsan all over the Quran. And He is so generous to also make us another promise, where He asks rhetorically, هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان? Can the reward for someone who excels be anything other than an excellent reward? And in a famous hadith that's been narrated in Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed excellence on anything. In fact, Allah even tells us, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. And we have created mankind in the most excellent composition. We were just talking a couple of minutes ago about children running and their heart rate. Do you know, my dear brothers and sisters, that your heart and my heart beats every single day 100,000 times? And do you know that it moves 7,500 liters of blood every single day? And do you know that if we were to take all of the arteries and nerves in our body and stretch them out as far as we can, it would be the distance of 100,000 kilometers? The network of arteries in our bodies, if stretched enough, can go around the circumference of the earth more than twice. Our brains can conduct 3 trillion calculations in a second. The human body is composed of 32 trillion cells. Think of any man-made manufactured product, an airplane. Think of how often you have to service that engine, how many times you have to change the oil on your car. And even after you change the oil regularly and fix it regularly and keep up with the maintenance schedule, eventually you have to rip out the engine and get rid of it. Your heart and my heart has been beating from the moment we were a fetus until the moment you die for decades and decades, despite all the abuse we do to our bodies and with virtually no maintenance whatsoever. These are the examples that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. Look at the miracles and the signs in your own selves. Do you not see? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed excellence upon Himself and upon all of His creation. And it is our responsibility, my dear brothers and sisters, to conduct ourselves as parents, as children, as community members, as professionals, as students, as members of broader networks in the most excellent fashion. You're at home, you're helping your spouse with some chores, do it with ihsan. Somebody asks you to do them a favor, do it with ihsan. You're picking something up off the street, move it in a way that is appropriate. These things, this aspect of conducting ourselves and viewing the world through the lens of ihsan is what distinguishes us as believers, and it is what we will be asked about on the Day of Judgment. My dear brothers and sisters, I advise myself, beginning before any of you, that we will be asked on the Day of Judgment by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the gifts He gave us. No one is going to hold you accountable. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to punish you for something you couldn't do. But if there is something you can do and you have the capacity to do it, you have an obligation according to the command of Allah to do it, and to do it with excellence. And I swear by Allah, if this community were to rise up and excel in its affairs, you will see people entering this deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with unbelievable resoluteness, because they will see that there is something about this faith, an obligation and a calling that makes the person more successful, happier, and more productive, because you know that you do your part and you leave the results in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Failure is not getting the result. Failure is not doing your best. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا برحمتك شر ما قضيت فإنك تقضي بالحق سبحانك إنه لا يقضى عليك إنه لا يذل من واليت ولا يعز من عاديت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت. اللهم لا تجعل لنا في هذا اليوم العظيم ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا مريضا إلا شفيته ولا مبتلا إلا عافيته برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. عباد الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه على نعمه يزدكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. وأقم الصلاة. My dear brothers, please make sure you compress and move forward and make as much space as possible, inshallah, so we can allow others to step in. جزاكم الله خيرا.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
استووا واعتدلوا. Make sure, my dear brothers and sisters, you're standing feet to feet, shoulder to shoulder. Brothers, if anybody is wearing a low-cut shirt, just make sure you tuck it, inshallah, so that when you're making sujood or ruku', you're not exposed. And make sure you filled in the lines in front before new lines are created, inshallah. Can I get a signal from the back, inshallah, that we're ready? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually commands us in the Quran saying that يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا قِيلَ لَكُمْ تَفَسَّحُوا فِي الْمَجَالِسِ فَافْسَحُوا يَفْسَحِ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. If you are asked to make spaces in the masajid, make those spaces and Allah will make space for you, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Allahu Akbar. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى والذي أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى سنقرئك فلا تنسى إلا ما شاء الله إنه يعلم الجهر وما يخفى ونيسرك لليسرى فذكر إن نفعت الذكرى سيذكر من يخشى ويتجنبها الأشقى الذي يصلى النار الكبرى ثم لا يموت فيها ولا يحيا قد أفلح من تزكى وذكر اسم ربه فصلى بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى إن هذا لفي الصحف الأولى صحف إبراهيم وموسى. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.